Salutations, people of the intertubes. So, I've had a thought, which I realize is something considering this is the internet. But this is one that I've been sitting on for some time, and I figured I'd just put it out there and see what sort of reaction it gets. Now, I'll admit up front that this is hardly a unique topic idea for a video. I've personally seen many such videos on it in my time surfing the YouTube waves. However, I have yet to see one that breaks it down quite as I have. Of course, if anyone knows differently, feel free to sound off in the appropriate section. All right, enough preamble. Let's get on with it. What makes a good villain? Or, phrased more accurately, what exactly separates a villain from a garden-variety antagonist? We know there must be an answer, or else why would the separate labels exist? Well, to answer that, we'll need some basic definitions to start from. Number 1. What is an antagonist? Quite simply, it is a character that opposes the protagonist, or main character, in a narrative. Okay, great. Now, how do we define a villain? Well, if we use a taxonomic approach, that is finding every example of a character universally accepted to be a villain and extracting the common elements from all, I believe we can generate a definitive answer. Having done this, I have come to the conclusion that antagonists can be slotted into one of 3 major categories: rivals, enemies, and villains. Though it is worth noting here that these are by no means mutually exclusive, and nearly every character who can be said to possess personality will, by narrative necessity, fit the qualifications of at least the first 2. All right, some definitions again. Let's go. An antagonist is a rival when their goals are mutually exclusive to the protagonists, i.e., they both want something that they can't both have, hence conflict. The important feature of a rival is that they have little, if any, personal qualms with the protagonist, meaning if any other person or character were in the same situation, they would have the same reaction. So if your MC can be replaced by, say, Batman or Sherlock Holmes or Luke Skywalker, and your antagonist wouldn't care to know the difference. They're a rival. Now, an enemy's antagonism, by contrast, is personally tied to the protagonist specifically. Think about it. When you're enemies with someone, they don't really care about screwing up whatever you're doing so much as merely seeing you fail. As stated, these two are almost never mutually exclusive. The only exception I can think of being the faceless goon tasked with guarding the castle gate. He doesn't care who you are. He just has orders not to let anyone through, and you're part of that cast. This then brings us neatly along to our 3rd and final category, villains. Now, a villain takes elements of both the rival and the enemy camps and merges them into one singularly menacing, absolute, and unabashed threat to the protagonist's health and way of life. They have mutually exclusive goals, blowing up or taking over the world being just the most stock examples, and they hate the MC specifically, either because they're destined to thwart their plans because they're somehow uniquely qualified to, or because they share some deep, traumatic history. Whatever the case, the main question we're left with is, why do we still need villains? Why not simply stick to the rival-enemy dynamic? God knows that's easier to write, plus it's more realistic. Well, firstly, I think people are conflating the ideas of realistic with believable. The former means that something could actually happen in reality. Hopefully you don't need me to tell you this, but not a whole lot of anything that happens in fiction is realistic. But we can make these things that everyone knows don't or can't actually happen feel real by clothing them in enough easily relatable elements, thoughts, feelings, etc., that the audience can bridge that gap for themselves. Second, the purpose of any antagonist is to challenge the protagonist. A villain is simply the logical extreme of said challenge. They're more a force of nature than a character. The best villains will push the protagonist beyond their breaking point on every conceivable level. They are the enemy of our heroes' very souls, and by very close extension, ours. A villain is good when they can challenge not only the hero, but the audience as well. The one and only weakness any good villain suffers, therefore, is that they do not grow or change while the protagonist, and hopefully the audience, does, and hence they will be overcome. Of course, this then begs another question, that of, can a villain have a redemption arc? The short answer, no. the slightly longer answer, no, for reasons I've already outlined. The whole point of a villain is that they don't grow or change. If a character is capable of redemption, then they're not a real villain. They're simply a stock enemy class with delusions of grandeur. And to answer the two most obvious rebukes right out of the gate, Darth Vader wasn't redeemed, and Zuko wasn't a villain. A single good act does not undo a lifetime of evil, in George Lucas's own words. All Vader did in Episode 6 was stop the bleeding. As for the Fire Prince, he was an abused child whose story centered around him coming to grips with the fact that his abusive father was never going to see him as anything more than an instrument, a thing to be used and discarded, just as he did to Azula, who only found out too late. So yeah, in conclusion, a good villain in this sense is a character who represents an unavoidable, unimpeachable, irreconcilable affront to the protagonist. A thing that must be confronted, or else the protagonist's entire world will perish. They embody natural selection. They give the MC, and by proxy the audience, a choice. Do we stay weak and compliant, or do we become heroes? Do we rise to the challenge and become like kings and gods? Or do we slink back into our squalor and watch as our world rots and dies? That's my opinion, for whatever it's worth. Let me know yours down below. And, as always, if you like stories, consider checking out my book, Flint Pirate Academy, on Amazon. Link will be in the description box. See you next time.